Okay, we are on Chav Beis Amud Aleph, 22, A. Chav Beis Amud Aleph. So yesterday the last thing we said was a quote from Avkana, who spoke in the name of Nassan, son of Minomi, who said in the name of Reb Tanachon, who said that the Menorah should be under 20 amos and 20 cubits high. And as we explained, it's so that passerbys on the street should be able to see it without having to strain their necks and look up, just at a glance, be able to see it. And we said this is the same as the sukkah, where a person is supposed to be able to see the schach very easily, and thus the schach cannot be higher than 20 amos. And likewise, the mavoi, the indication to the marker to indicate to the dwellers of the alleyway to know where the alley ends and where the public domain lives, that also has to be within 20 amos, has to be within 20 cubits. So the Gemoro further states another statement said by the same people, right? That's correct, same people. And that's why it's being quoted here on this simple level. Go back a page, you can see who quoted it. Yeah, it's Rav Kana speaking in the name of Reb Nassan, son of Minomi, in the name of Talmud. So that's often the case. The Gemara is mentioned a few times. The Gemara is a conglomerate of conversations rather than a coherent, singular work where one person has the end in mind before they begin writing. The Gemara is more of a conglomerate of conversations that are constantly redacted and constantly added over the span of a few hundred years. So sometimes the Gemara will do that. We'll quote somebody, and then you can imagine they're sitting in the study hall and someone quotes the statement and someone says, oh, I heard something else in the name of this person, the name of this person, with the same sequence of people speaking, and here's the other statement. And sometimes the Gemara will do that. So that's a simple reading why the statement is about to come follows. But obviously there's always a deeper connection, and perhaps will suggest something. Okay, the statement is not related to our parsha, but related to the storyline from which our parsha is in the middle of. So it's a few weeks ago. Okay, V'omer Rav Kana, second line, top of the page. V'omer Rav Kana further stated, Darish Rav Nassan bar Minomi, Rabbi Nassan, son of Minomi, expounded. Which made it Rav Tanachon, the name of Rav Tanachon. Good morning, Robert. Both Roberts on Zoom also. Mimash Meshanemar. What is implied by the verse which says, V'boirek, and the pit was empty. Sorry, my diksiv, I skipped the line. I was quoting it in Rashi's version. My diksiv, what's the meaning of the verse which says, V'boirek, ein by mayim. The pit was empty, there was no water. So this is a reference to the pit that Yosef was first cast into when his brothers were jealous of him and they cast him into the pit and eventually sold him off to slavery. So the verse states the pit that he was thrown into is empty and had no water. Now the word boir, pit, it seems from Rashi in a few places the word pit, the word boir actually implies to a reservoir of water. And for example, one place Rashi translates the word boir doesn't just necessarily mean it has water, it means any guma, any ditch in the ground. But it would seem like the word boir, which is in Hebrew we translate as pit, actually means a reservoir of water. But here the pasuk says, V'boirek, the pit was empty. And then it says it's ein by mayim, there's no water. And if the Gemara asks, Mashma, is it not implied, Shenemar, from the verse that says, V'boirek, that the water was empty? Any idea? Do I not know she'ein by mayim that has no water? You said the pit is empty. Why repeat yourself and say there's no water? Therefore, what's the extra phrase that there is no water come to teach me, since it already stated it's empty? Says the Gemara, ein by mayim, there's no water indeed, but mayim ein by. There's no water, but there is snakes and scorpions. So the verse reads, the pit was empty. I already know there's no water, because since it's empty. But then it repeats itself and says, unlike an ordinary boir, which would have water, this boir is empty, it has no water. But then it says, there is no water. Okay, it's empty, but empty from water, which means there are other things in there, thus implying there were snakes and scorpions in there when Yosef was thrown in. Simple reading. Deeper reading, and this is something that rings in my head from my school teachers. This is a young boy, and we learned this pasuk in Chumash. Of course, we know ein mayim el Torah. Torah is referred to as water. And the pit, the boir, is the mind. And therefore, if the mind is empty of water, the natural consequence is going to be there's going to be snakes and scorpions in the mind. That's what we were taught as kids. If the mind must be occupied with something. Nature abhors a vacuum. Unless you think it's empty space, not in the mind and not in the heart. And if our mind is empty of water, our mind lacks Torah to think about, it's going to be filled with snakes and scorpions, all kinds of distractions and all kinds of other things, just of consequence. And therefore the way to deal with the snakes and scorpions, as it were, is not to sit there and fight them. Just fill up the pit with water and they'll all be gone. Right? Same thing is true of the heart. We have a certain bandwidth for emotions. We can only experience a certain amount of emotions with time. And if we don't have positive emotions to fill up our hearts, then they're going to be filled with anxiety and then stresses and other things that are snakes and scorpion-like. But if we fill up the bandwidth of our hearts and minds with Torah and God, then as a natural consequence, we won't have the snakes and scorpions, we won't have the distractions. Thinking about it in that way, we can clearly see the connection to Chanukah. The whole menorah is about lighting up the darkness, lighting up the world out there, right? Putting it at the outside of our homes, at the windows, right? That's the whole idea, lighting it at nighttime as opposed to the menorah in the temple, which is lit during the day. The menorah on Chanukah specifically at night, even though it's to commemorate the menorah of the temple. But nonetheless, the law is not the same as the temple. The menorah is lit indoors, whereas the menorah, the menorah at the temple is lit indoors and during the day, whereas the Chanukah candles are lit at night and outside, meant to illuminate the darkness. And the same way we just described how, as a natural consequence, if there is no water in the pit, if there is no Torah in the mind, the natural consequence is there's going to be snakes and scorpions. So likewise, if there is no light of Torah and mitzvahs of Chanukah, the natural consequence is going to be darkness and the opposite. So you see quite clearly the connection between these two statements, not just the authors. In fact, the statement mentioned before from Rav Kana, in the name of Nosson, in the name of Rav Tanchum, is that the menorah has to be visible. Meaning to say, the whole point of the light is to fill people's life with light, like the pit that must be filled with water, rather than the vacuum that will be left there and automatically be filled with darkness and snakes and scorpions. So notwithstanding the surface reading, or looking beneath the surface reading, we see a deeper connection here beyond just the authors of the statement. Okay, back to the discussion of Chanukah, in a direct way at least. Says the Gemoro, Omar Rabbi says, following what we just discussed, Ner Chanukah, the light of the Chanukah, mitzvah. It's a mitzvah lahanicha, to place it, b'tefach hasmucha lepesach. It should be within a handbreadth of the actual door, right? We mentioned before that primarily the primary location of the menorah is to be outside at the door, right side mezuzah. We'll discuss that in a moment, but we mentioned that earlier. It's going to be at the door, if not at the window, if not inside, as we discussed in previous classes. So here the Gemara is adding a detail that has to be within a tefach, has to be within a handbreadth from the door. Okay, why? So as Rashi explains, right, where is the Rashi? Yes, because if it's too far away from the door, it doesn't look like you put it there. It could just look like a street light. If you put it close enough to the door, then it indicates to the world, I put it there because it's right next to my house. That's what Rashi says. Okay? And therefore, the Gemara continues, where by the door should be placed? Rav Acha, son of Rava, says, put it on the right side, which would mean it would be right under the mezuzah. Mezuzah on the right, and in this view, the menorah is also at the right. And the reason is because all mitzvahs are done at the right side. That's the way, when you're walking into your house, it should be at the right side, because that's where mitzvahs are always done, but the right. However, Rav Shmuel Medafti Omar, Rav Shmuel of Dafti said, Bismoil, it should be on the left side. So right side mezuzah, left side menorah. The hilchasa and Allah indeed is Bismoil, it should be on the left side. For what purpose? And as we mentioned here before, Kadeshatei Ner Chanukah Bismoil, if the person should be, the person should have a menorah on his left, and mezuzah yamin and the mezuzah on the right. In this way, he's surrounded by mitzvahs. And we've talked about in the past, Kabbalistically, there's the idea of the right side, the giving, the left side, the restraint, the right side, the flow of godly light, which comes through in the mezuzah, and the left side, engaging the darkness, that's the menorah, engaging the the forces that are of negativity, as it were, within our lives and within the world, represented by the menorah. And a person should be complete in that sense, both the right and the left. Okay. Further stated. So you mentioned before, and now the Gemoro states it explicitly, that the menorah candles are not meant to be used. They're candles of mitzvah, and therefore they shouldn't be used. And that's what the Gemoro is going to discuss now. And this is going to become a bit of a discussion for a little bit, for the next few days probably, on this issue of what's the reason that the menorah cannot be used, which gets down to defining what the mitzvah of the menorah is. And what's going to emerge, as we discussed in the past. Yeah. Sure. Of the menorah, yeah. Yeah. Right. The mezuzah going on the left side in Chabad is not because it's on the left side, but because we consider the entrance a different direction. Right? It's always to the right of the entrance. The question is, do you look at the entrance vis-a-vis the traffic, or do you look at the entrance vis-a-vis the way the door swings? So either way, it's always going to be on the right side. Just, for example, this door right here, it swings out. So if you're looking at the traffic, majority of traffic is coming into this room, but the door indicates to you that it's going out, because the door opens outward, which is why the menorah, which is why the mezuzah here is on the right side, going out of the room, because the door swings out. So it's still the right side. It's just the right side from the other perspective, because we're all looking at the door, not vis-a-vis the traffic, but vis-a-vis the door strings. So in this instance, you would put the menorah on the other side. You're staying consistent. You stay consistent with the direction of the door, and however you interpret it, whether you're using the swing, whether you're using the hinges, or whether you're using the traffic. But either way, you're staying consistent in that sense. Okay, so as I mentioned, the Gemoro is going to be discussing now why it is that the menorah cannot be used for our own personal pleasure, and it's going to come down to the essence of the mitzvah, and something we discussed earlier, which is that the mitzvah is not about the result, but the act. And therefore, this is the Gemara's real question, as we're going to see, is if the point is the if the point is the act, then once the act is done, why can't I enjoy the mitzvah? The point is to light the menorah, and once I lit the menorah, it's nothing to do with me anymore. The act is done, and even if it blows out, or even if it's, something happens, I still did the mitzvah, because at the moment of lighting it was kosher, then why should I care to use it? If the result is the mitzvah, okay, so the whole time it's in a mitzvah, so long as it's lit. Now I can't use it. But if it's just about the act, the moment of lighting, and once the moment of lighting is done, the mitzvah is done, then why can't I enjoy the light? I could put it out in theory, or if it went out, it would still fulfill my obligations, so why can't I use it? That's the Gemara is going to be discussing presently. And that's going to lead to a discussion about getting to the crux of it. What's the essence of the mitzvah? Is it about the result or the act? And that's going to be a discussion of the next little bit. So let's see how the Gemara launches into it. Omar Rava, Omar Rav Asi. Omar Rav. Rav Huda said, Omar Rav Huda said Rava. Omar Rav Huda, Omar Rav Asi, Omar Rav. Rav Huda said the name of Rav Asi and Rav Rav. One should not count money in the presence of using the light of the menorah. Okay, don't use it. This is the halacha. We say it again, mentioned before, we say it in a little prayer after we light the menorah, and Hanei Salala, we say, Hanei Salala Kodeshem, these candles are holy, and Lon Rishus L'Shtamish B'hem, we have no permission to make personal use of it. And therefore the Gemara states, no counting money using the light of the menorah. The Gemara further says, when this statement was said in the presence of Shmuel, Omar Li, he told me, I suppose it's Rabbi Huda speaking, I told the statement that I just told you in the presence of Shmuel, and he told me, does the flame have any holiness? Kind of what we were asking before. The mitzvah itself is the act of lighting, not the result of the light. So does the light at the end have some holiness that I can't use? I did the mitzvah. It's over. It's done. I haven't seen this comparison anywhere, but it's kind of like the lulav once Sukkot is over. For the 7 days of Sukkot, the lulav is a mitzvah. You cannot desecrate that. You cannot desecrate it. Like tefillin. It's an object of a mitzvah. But once Sukkot is over, and there's no more obligation to shake the lulav and esrog, it loses its holiness. And in theory, it can be thrown out. We do so respectfully. It's supposed to throw it out respectfully because it was a mitzvah. But it doesn't have any holiness intrinsically to it because the mitzvah is done already. This is a whole discussion, the halachic thinkers, if you will, that what exactly classifies an object to become a holy object. Does it only last for as long as the mitzvah lasts, or does it continue on forever? Which mitzvahs the holiness lasts forever? Which mitzvahs don't? But lulav is in, for example, in a shul. There's a discussion about that. The holiness lasts forever, or if it doesn't, it's from Machlekes, Ramban, and others. But the lulav is certainly an example where the moment the sukkah is over and there's no more mitzvah for the shek lulav nesser, it loses its holiness, it loses its holy status. You can take your esrog and turn it into a jam, as many do. Okay, the menorah is not really the mitzvah; it's just holding up your candles, right? In other words, the menorah is just a casing. The mitzvah is not to have a candelabra. The mitzvah is to have lights. You can put them down on the floor also, or whatever on the table, without any holder, without any fancy holder. So that's for sure not. But the candles themselves, once the mitzvah is done, the second after I've done lighting them, Shmuel's arguing there's no more holiness anymore. So why can't I use it to look at to count money? It's not holy. I've done the mitzvah. It's over. It's done. Like sukkah is being over, even though it's still menorah, even though it's still Chanukah, and I only looked at menorah 2 seconds ago. But once the act is done, mitzvah is done. Why can't they count it?
You have that 30-minute.
But we already discussed that it's not as if it has to actually last for 30 minutes. It's at the moment of lighting it has to have enough to last for 30 minutes, which is why, in theory, if the candle is blown out, ein zakuk lo, it's one of the first halachas we discussed, that the candle is blown out after the 30 minutes, I'm not obligated to relight it. Because at the moment of lighting it, it had the qualification of a candle that can last for 30 minutes. And if it didn't last 30 minutes, not my problem. The moment of lighting it, I did it. Because again, the act is the mitzvah, not the result.
The difference there, you had nothing to do with the fact that it went out. If you did, that's a problem.
Yeah. I don't know if it's a problem either if I put it out. Maybe it's not respectful, but I don't know that I retroactively didn't fulfill the mitzvah. Even if I put it out, I'm not convinced that it undoes your mitzvah. Maybe it might be disrespectful, as we'll see in a moment, but I don't think it undoes your mitzvah, because at the moment of lighting it, you did the mitzvah. Correct, not the result. And the fact that it goes out later, not my issue.
No, but if you put it out, then you're violating the 30 that it should last for 30 minutes because you directly.
So I'm not sure if you're retroactive. I shouldn't answer the question. I'm not sure, but it would seem to me that it may be disrespectful, but I don't think you'll have undone your mitzvah retroactively.
What's the value of requirement to last 30 minutes?
Because in that moment, it has to be a legit candle. Because in the moment of lighting, it has to be a legit candle. And a legit candle lasts for 30 minutes. But it's only at the moment of lighting it has to be that way. Right? If your menorah candles go out on Friday night, you shouldn't get stressed out.
No.
It's Shabbos. At the moment of lighting, I did it. I don't know what the answer is when you actually put it out. But the point here is that the moment of lighting it has to be correct. After the lighting is done, the mitzvah is no longer. It's the side effect of the mitzvah that it happens to be lit. But the mitzvah is no longer. And therefore Shmuel argues, why not count it? Why not count your money? There's no holiness anymore. The mitzvah is done. The Gemoro challenges by saying another mitzvah, which doesn't have any holiness in the object of the mitzvah, and at the same time requires a certain level of decency and respect. That's the Gemara is about to challenge. Says the Gemara, Maskav Rav Yosef challenged. Does blood have any holiness? This is a reference to the mitzvah of when an animal is ritually slaughtered, so the blood from which the life has left the animal, that the first blood that's drawn, is to be covered with earth. It's a mitzvah to cover that blood with earth. Now the halacha is like this. Now that blood obviously has no holiness. It's not the object of a mitzvah. It's just blood from an animal. There's no object. It's not an object of a mitzvah there. You have to be doing a mitzvah with it by covering the blood. But the blood itself is not holy blood that has to be treated with any kind of. It has, it's not a pair of tefillin, the blood, right? It just has to be covered. And if the halacha is, and yet the halacha still is, the time we learned, the shafach, the verse says, you slaughter the animal, the blood is spilt, and then you cover it. And if the Mishnah derives, or the Mishnaic age text derives from that verse, the kisa b'masha shafach, he should cover the blood with through the same medium that he drew the blood. Meaning to say, that he should not cover it with his feet. You drew the blood with a hand, with a ritual slaughter, with a special knife, a shchita. So you drew the blood with your hand, and therefore the blood now is on the ground. You should not cover it using your feet. Why? So that the mitzvah should not be disrespected. Even though the blood doesn't retain any holiness, it's not the object of a mitzvah. It's just an object through which you're doing a mitzvah. Like the lulav. The lulav is not the object of a mitzvah. It's an object through which you're doing a mitzvah. And if as soon as the mitzvah is over, Sukkot is over, no longer any holiness to the lulav. The blood itself, again, is not a mitzvah. Sorry? Yeah, it's a consequence of the mitzvah. It's not like the blood became a pair of tefillin now that's an object of a mitzvah. It's not. You're doing a mitzvah with it. And yet we're told, be respectful. Don't cover it with your feet. Cover it with your hands because you're doing a mitzvah here. Be respectful. Even though it has no holiness.
Weren't they slaughtering animal after animal?
Yeah, so?
So eventually that spot where the blood drops becomes mud.
So? You cover it with earth at the end. Cover it with earth. It's not so much. By when you do kaparas, you do it. If you're ever there at the moment of slaughtering kaparas, you do the mitzvah.
It's just a chicken. It's got a couple of.
Okay. So same thing with any bigger animals also. Take a shovel, a little blood, and that's it.
Only applies, by the way, to the wild animals.
That's right. It doesn't apply to domesticated animals. It only applies to birds and undomesticated animals. That's correct. It doesn't belong to animals, right? It only goes to chicken. It doesn't go to cows and things. If a person slaughtered a deer, maybe we'd go to that. Okay. So the Gemoro is basically making the point. The blood has no mitzvah. The blood has no holiness. It's not the object of a mitzvah. Yet we are instructed to behave respectfully and not to cover it with our feet. So therefore the Gemara says, same thing Hachanami here too, Shmuel. The reason why we're told not to count the money by the candles is not because they themselves are an object of a mitzvah, but rather mitzvahs bezuyas alav, that the mitzvah shouldn't be disrespected. That is why you couldn't put it out, I imagine. It's disrespectful, not because the mitzvah is no longer, not because there's still a mitzvah there. The mitzvah is no longer. So which is an interesting kind of midway between. Even if you're of the view, or notwithstanding that the fact that we're of the view that you cannot use the candles for personal use, it doesn't mean necessarily that the mitzvah itself is still going. The mitzvah is done the moment you lit the candle. But because we did a mitzvah with this object, be respectful about it. And don't use the light. Even though it doesn't retain its mitzvah status. Mitzvah status is done the moment it's lit. Which then becomes the question, which is discussed, why we say in Haner Salalu, why we say in this prayer that we say after lighting the candle, Haner Salalu Kodesh, these candles are holy. Didn't we just finish saying they're not holy? Must be speaking to a different level, as discussed in many of the commentaries. Because it's not, we just finished saying it's not actually holy. It's just a question of being respectful to an object with which we did a mitzvah. Right? Okay. God willing, more on that tomorrow and days after, trying to understand the essence of what this means. That the mitzvah is not the result, the mitzvah is the act, but yet it retains a certain level of, I don't know if the word is holiness, but a certain level of respect required when we engage with this mitzvah, or when we engage with the result of this mitzvah, even though the mitzvah is no longer.
It does make sense. It makes very good sense.
Okay, explain.
Because you're lighting this as a mitzvah for lighting the candles.
Yeah.
Or to celebrate Chanukah. But if you have other reasons for lighting it.
Yeah.
It's
yeah. Right, so that's correct. So it makes sense to say that you have to be respectful of the mitzvah even though you've done it. And that's what the point is saying. Yeah, which is why, for example, we also said before with the lulav, this example of a mitzvah that ends and the time is over, right? The lulav is no longer holy when Sukkot is over because the mitzvah has been done. And yet, as you mentioned, when you throw it out, you're supposed to throw it out respectfully. Because the mitzvah was done with it, even though it doesn't have the holiness of, say, tefillin, which is an object of a mitzvah. It's a holy object. Right. So that's the halachic description. Is an object, like you said, not a consequence. If this is an object for which you do a mitzvah, or is it itself an object of holiness, an object of a mitzvah? Yeah. Is it just its use, or is it intrinsic to it itself? The tefillin, it's intrinsic to it itself. It retains holiness. The blood of the animal, it's an object to which I do the mitzvah. And the same thing is true of an esrog. It's an object to which I do the mitzvah. And if when I'm done the mitzvah, it's over. And the same thing is true of the candles. It's an object to which I did the mitzvah. So the moment of lighting was the mitzvah, mitzvah's done. But yet, as you say, and as the Gemara point says today, still, it's an object you did a mitzvah with. Be respectful about it. Shabbos candles are different. Because Shabbos candles you're supposed to enjoy. They're meant for you to enjoy. Whether the result is the purpose.
But you don't want to read beside.
That's a side issue. We're worried that you're going to tilt it and make the flame go bigger. But in essence, you're supposed to enjoy the candles that was our opening discussion. Sorry?
Last night when we lit the candles, I said to Karen, it's dark outside. Look at the candles. They're beautiful.
Yeah, saying they're beautiful is different than using it for personal use. Saying they're beautiful could be admiring the mitzvah, which is a nice thing. But as I mentioned a few days ago, the romantic notion of turning off the lights, it's not a good idea. Keep the lights on so that you don't end up using the light of the candle. You're not supposed to. That's just fade. It's not disrespectful.
That's an issue of respect,
Not exactly. It's an issue of respect. It's not an issue of the fact that this thing still retains the inherent value of mitzvah. Because it doesn't. It's not like a pair of tefillin.
It's not a condition for fulfilling the mitzvah.
No. That's another way of putting it, yes. It's not a condition for fulfilling the mitzvah that you make no use of the mitzvah. It's a respectful, that's right. The mitzvah is done. It's just it's a respectful thing that you just finished doing a mitzvah with this object. Be nice about it.
That would be also would fit the idea of the shamash. Have that extra light burning.
That's correct.
Disrespect the candle.
That's correct. That's what we talked. That's what we mentioned. That's right. We mentioned that a few days ago. That's the reason why we have a shamash, so that you don't end up using the light of the menorah. And if you happen to be reading or using nearby light, you're not using the candles of the menorah. You're using the shamash. Right.
Most of the laws of Judaism are for respect.
A lot of them are, and most of them are, but a lot of them are, sure. A lot of it has to do with respect. Okay, wonderful day, everybody.